going to do a quick review of where we were, what we went over last Tuesday night. So next slide, please. Municipal budget. Go back one if you would, Ben. As you can see, work session 2 tonight, we're going to do a review of the municipal budget, talk about some of the council prerogatives, just a quick review of that. We're going to go into some of the budget context so you can see some different things. Where we are now at Duncan, down in the weeds where we're hoping to have enough time so city staff can make some presentations on their services with John. And then if there's still time, we'll do a little summary of takeaway points. Next slide. Municipal budget, as we talked about last week, it's the council's budget. It's the most important document, that one of the most important documents that it drafts, and it's a legal document. Next. It's a management plan. It should reflect council's priorities. And as we discussed last week, the priorities that staff is budgeting towards and working off of is from the 2017 advance that the last council made. And so that's what they're working towards. The new council will need to have an advance of some point. So if they want to go different directions, they've got information to do that with. Next. It's just not financial data. Like we said, it represents goals, objectives. Next. It's also an evaluation tool. So when you get to the end of the year with your budget, you can go back and say, did we accomplish everything that we established and we identified? So next. And finally, it's set by the state as to getting the budget set by a certain date and adopted. And one of the things that you need to really remember is that it's a living document. So even though you establish the budget, adopt it, as you go into next year, if you see that changes need to be made, you may do so. Next. Next, please. Okay. We also visited that this is a continuation budget. And like I said, we were talking about 2017 council's goals and objectives. 2020's council needs to begin to set their own. And that's why we're talking about a little bit about an advance a little bit later. Next. It also assumes that the current budget is sufficient for priorities and that priorities remain stable from year to year. So in other words, we're working from 2019, helped us set 2020's, which is going to help us set 2021's budget. Next. It presumes the current resource allocation, utilization, and levels of service are sufficient and efficient and are based upon existing goals and objectives. So this council has not set new guidelines, new goals and objectives. So staff is working off the old ones. Next. It provides an opportunity for evaluating city services, programs, and projects. And that's part of what we're hoping to get started tonight as staff reviews what their services are and their levels of service. Next. It helps the staff and the city to continue to move in the direction that is established. It takes a look at best practices and provides for the city budget process to provide direction for city staff. Next. Also in a continuation budget, as we mentioned last week, 90 to 95% is set for 2021 as it's based on 2020's and 2019's. So if we continue to follow along the same goals and objectives and try to achieve them without any new direction, most of what you're going to be seeing in the budget is set. Next. We also need to remember that these are unprecedented times. COVID-19 has left a lot up in the air. How is it affecting our revenues? We know that revenues are down, even though they're higher than we expect them to be. But we still don't know, as we're starting to go into our tourism season, what's the effect of COVID on tourism? What's it going to do for the rest of the year to us? So there are some things we just don't know. And John and Ben are having to make some guesses as to what those revenues are going to mean and where they're going to take us. Next. The 2020 budget was also a balanced budget based upon expenses being equal to expected revenues without borrowing or going into reserves. I believe that's what John is trying to attempt again this year. As we heard the other day, they weren't there yet. They were still at that point in time, it was unbalanced as they had higher expenditures than revenues without borrowing or without going into reserves. And so staff is still working on those things. Next. 2020's budget saw some new internal service fees as set by the previous council and John. And one of the things that had been identified by staff was that the city charter identifies that, and I'm going to read it here to you because I made a copy of it. Apportionment of expenses. The salaries of the city manager, directors, and others rendering services to 2 or more departments, and expenses of departments rendering services to other departments or to improvement districts shall be, and I get that, shall be, not may, shall be equitably apportioned and charged against the proper department or other agencies. This has not been done in the past. And if you read shall, I think if you visit with Mike Green, the city attorney, shall means you're supposed to be doing it. You don't have a choice. So this is something that is new, and John got it started this year. The other item that staff has come across is that the way the budget apportionments and adoption has been done in the past wasn't entirely correct, that it was more of a summary, and it actually states in the city charter that the budget as adopted but need not be itemized further than by departments and major divisions thereof. Whereas in the past, it was more by fund rather than by, when it was being adopted, rather than going as far as lining out what the department's expenses were and what major divisions there might be, such as the police department with detectives, patrol, building, kennel, etc. That's part of the apportionment and process that has to be done. And Ben is going to be presenting that to you this year around, so we're in compliance with what the city charter requires. Next. In prepping for a council advance, and hopefully you might be able to get to it yet sometime this year when we can begin to get together, you need to take into consideration the effects of COVID-19 in the community. What's going on right now, short term, but also what is the long-term prognostications? You know, are we looking at an issue with COVID-19 over a year, over 2 years? You know, it has just sprung up all over the West and in the South again. So it's not going away. So how long is it going to be with us? You need to take that in consideration. You also need to take a look at 2021's budget's going to be set for next year, but there might need to be changes. And then start thinking towards 2022. Where's the community going? Where's it going to be in 2025? Where do you think it should be in 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040? You need to be looking long-term down the road, because some of your goals and objectives may not just be geared towards what's happening next year. And if you're only looking short-term, you're not going to be prepared in 10 years, perhaps when you have to replace a facility, or as water lines need to be replaced, or streets need to be replaced. So you need to look long-term. One of the other things that you need to have some discussion on, and at your advance, and we call it an advance now rather than a retreat, because you're wanting to move forward. So if you're not familiar with the term advance, that's what we're getting at. Anyway, you need to kind of review what some of your quasi-judicial hearings, how you're supposed to behave, what you really look at, how you handle them. You need to start thinking about, well, what are conflicts of interest? Am I personally involved in something on my personal level, and it carries over to the city, maybe I need to recuse myself. You know, you need to start taking a look, what are those connections? Where should I back off? Where should I step aside? You need to be aware of those things. And that'd be a good area for Mike Green to visit with you on. Same thing with communications. You're a group of 7. It takes 4 votes to approve something. When you're communicating, you need to be communicating with all of council, not just 1 or 2 members all the time. Same thing, visiting with the city manager. If you're visiting with the city manager and you're wanting to talk to a staff member, you need to be letting the city manager know. Don't just, if you just happen to run into a staff member on the street, hey, that's fine, but you might still want to let the city manager know that, oh, I was asking questions of Parks and Rec the other day. I just want you to know we just happen to run into each other. Or if you have specific questions, some of your other council members may have those same questions. So you may want to put them through John so that everybody gets the same answer. It's the same thing as John does. If he's got a communication, maybe he's needing to communicate it with all department heads and let everybody know, not just let 1 or 2 know. And if he's got some serious direction, like on the budget, he needs to let staff know, hey, we're looking at a 20% cutback, or we're needing to reduce this, or we're going to get an increase, cost of living increase. You know, communications is very, very important, and keeping everyone informed is the best way to handle that. Council's also was responsible for setting policy. But again, like I said, it takes 4 of you at least to agree. So you're needing to hash those things out and talk about where we're going. And finally, you have responsibilities to each other. There are 7 of you. If you hear something, you know, maybe you're needing to pass it on so that everyone is aware. If you have questions, there may be others on the council that have the same questions. So don't hesitate to keep it to yourself, or hesitate to keep it to yourself. Don't hesitate to spread it around and ask. I think that's one of the biggest things you can do is ask. And finally, establish a clear plan and direction for where you want city government and where it is headed. Staff, the city manager can do a much better job for you if they know where you're going, if you have clear direction. If you change it year to year, it's hard for staff to respond and give you direction and deliver the ideas and direction that you want for the community. So being clear on that makes a world of difference. Next. Okay, that was a quick review and some thoughts and comments. And again, like we did last week, at any point in time, if you have questions, please just raise your hand, speak up, and we'll go off in that direction. Okay, next we're going to be talking about budget context. Ben is going to do a review and some explanation of what is included in the budget, talk about some terms and what some of the forms are going to look like, and begin to broaden your knowledge of the budget and what you're going to be seeing as you go through the budget presentations. Ben, I'll turn it over to you. Ben, if you're speaking, we're not getting any voice, any sound.
Yep. No, okay. I have cleaners here, so I had to mute myself.
Oh,
I forgot to unmute. Thank you. So anyway, what I was saying was just good evening again, and it's a pleasure to see you all again and have you all here. This section, the goal is to go through some of the, as Chris said, go through some of the terms, as well as to get your feet wet and maybe have a chance for more explanation, discussion, if need be, on how the budget may look and some information you're seeing, as well as some slight variances and differences that we had in last year's budget. The reason for it coming now is as Duncan gets into talking about balancing the budget and fund balances, this section is to help give you a little bit of idea of maybe where we're at, So as Duncan starts going through his pieces, you can start seeing how they fit together and where your various tools in your toolbox may come in. So that's the goal here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate, because a lot of what we're going to go through here is something you'll see continuously through our budgeting process, and it'll help start creating that foundation. Okay, so please don't hesitate. Right off the bat, what we're just going to do is just talk about some of the what I had been calling previously cost categories, major line items. Okay, it's the same thing. I'm just going to try and change my own terminology from corporate America to more of public governmental accounting lines, but it's major line items. Okay, and what these are, you have personnel services, charges and services, materials and supplies, intergovernmental capital outlay, and there's one more page that has grants, debt service, and depreciation. And this is how governments in general will categorize their disbursements or their investments that they do within the community. And what it can allow you to do is, as you're looking at other municipalities, we're all kind of looking at disbursements in the same light. We're talking a consistent language, and that's part of that goal here. So when we talk about personnel services as a major line item, this is really all the expenses we have related to employees. Your salaries, the benefits, the medical, dental, retirement, the SUTA, the FICA, everything associated to the personnel. Okay. For a moment of clarity, though, it does not include, let's say, training for an individual or memberships for an individual. That's included somewhere else. So this is really the total compensation for employees, right? And when we say employees, we're talking full-time, part-time, everyone, seasonal workers, okay? The next line item is our major line item is charges and services. And how I look at this is these are in essence services that the city purchases from contractors, okay? And these expenses, they may be a one-off expense, or they may be a recurring expense, okay? And so recurring would be, let's say, like your city attorney, that I know I put insurance, I didn't mean to put insurance, is actually material supply, so I apologize for that. I just realized that. But your janitorial expenses as well, okay? They're contracts that we have, and it's basically what it's saying is we're contracted to purchase these services for the rest of the year. And the reason why it's under charge of services, in my mind, a simple way is you have a harder time to reduce these services because you've already contracted with someone to purchase these, right? So it's harder to get out of contracts. Next line item down is the materials and supplies. And this is just a general way to think about it. This is where this is your day-to-day operations and purchases of those goods that help you deliver your services on a day-to-day. So, if the rec center, they're purchasing chemicals for the pool, right? We purchase a lot of cleaning supplies and whatnot for day-to-day, paper as well for the office buildings. This is also where we would have training for employees or even training for city council that you attend. It kind of goes into here. Something to keep in mind, and as way as the budget is, as way as each of the departments will see these major line items, there are detailed line items behind these, okay, by accounts. So we can break it out in further detail.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
So which category would say reoccurring programs that people pay, year annual fees for?
So I just want to clarify, make sure I'm hearing it the same way as what you're intending, okay? So when we say these are payments made by the city for various services, goods that we purchase. So when you say payments of programs, I want to make sure you're not talking about revenue programs like from the rec center where people will pay for a service that we provide.
No, like Cassell, I'm sure we pay an annual fee to have that program.
Right. It's going to depend on what type of, when you say program, if you're talking software and systems programs, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Those would be typically in charges and services because it's a contract.
Okay.
Good
That's
question.
all I have.
Yeah, no, good question. And frankly, and one of the things I'll say is if we can't break it down into more detail behind these, we're not doing our job, okay? Right now, the way our budget's built is you can see more behind it. We would just have to share it with you. As for materials and supplies, we have the intergovernmental. And really what that is, that's the, as Chris had said early on, one of the newer concepts that John had brought to council last year that council said, yes, let's go ahead and do, was the cost allocation of services provided by, or provided to and within the city. So for example, finance, I provide payroll services, I provide budgeting services, I provide financial reporting and accounting services to the city. So to all the other departments, we allocate those costs out, okay? Another example here, what you see is the shop costs. So purchasing of fuel, repairs and of equipment and vehicles. Dispatch, we pay dispatch, because there's a dispatch fund for the use of dispatch. And that's where you're gonna see the expense side of it here, okay? This is kind of new questions. Yeah.
I have a question. So you said that this didn't previously exist with the city, the intergovernmental line item?
A point of clarity is it had been occurring for shop technology and dispatch only for a number of years. The process by which the methodology on how the allocation was occurring, it could be improved, but that's like anything. You start somewhere and you improve as you progress. So we have been doing shop technology and dispatch, but as you heard Chris talk about the city code charter, it says city manager, I think it said it explicitly, city manager and department heads services that we provide should be cross-charged. At the end of the day, I would say that is what has not been happening. We just kind of stopped the shop technology and dispatch and said, that's enough. Now that's previous to John and myself. That goes back for a number of years. So when John brought it up last year, the extent of which was new. We have more services we can cross-charge, but we need to do it in a mindful manner that has a methodology behind it. So we're not just trying to nickel and dime all the departments just for the general fund's sake, okay? We're trying to do it in a respective manner that's fair and equitable to what the various departments and funds utilize. A great example is you have a vehicle, right? When you go to the gas station to get it filled up, you only pay for what you use, right? That it's like kind of like that concept here. If the airport has a vehicle and they go get gas, they should pay for what they use. And that's kind of that's one of the things we need to improve upon, the methodologies, but that's an example of the cross-charging of services, because that service for airport fuel is provided by shop.
Ben, if I could jump in here, the reason that this is considered best practice and has been a practice for many years, many decades in the municipal accounting and budgeting is that your line departments are the ones that are delivering direct services. And the full cost of those services is not really easily recognized unless you allocate or apportion, based, as Ben says, on a reasonable basis, what the overhead cost is also. Private corporations, private businesses also practice this in their cost accounting side so that you can see the full cost of actually operating your police, your recreation department, your library, et cetera, including the direct overhead as part of it.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. And to give you an example, one reason why we need to go into a mindful manner and approach with the methodology is, for example, our dispatch fund, okay? So dispatch fund, and I don't want to take, if Vern's on, I do see Vern on, he might talk about it a little later, is dispatch is where we have the costs associated to run the dispatch service for the city, the county, and the hospital and other municipalities around, right? So when you call 911, dispatch answers. The city of Cortez runs that. We are not allocating any costs from the general fund to the dispatch. For example, John is city manager. He provides oversight and administration over dispatch, but John's time is not being allocated to the dispatch at this point. The reason being is this is where we have to come in with a mindful and manner is there are constraints. Okay, dispatch constraints are we have contracts and MOUs or whatnot with those other municipalities. They need to budget as well, just like we are, right? So they need to know how much it's going to cost them on their side to utilize the dispatch services. We need to make sure we go through a mindful manner by which we communicate what those charges or costs might be, because it will be included with the new dispatch costs, meaning those costs will go up, right? So those third parties are using the services. You don't want to just go, oh, here you go, surprise, and go from there. You know, you want to do it, and it's a collaborative effort, and that's where some of these constraints have to just be managed and worked through.
Okay, so what is the benefit then charging other departments for service versus providing that department with the funding they already need up front? Is it because of different funds?
What do you mean by providing them with the funding up front?
So say you're charging every department to use the finance department, and instead of giving the finance department the budget they need to not have to charge other departments.
So it's not necessarily, for like the finance department, we'll just use myself, right? For payroll, for example, okay? I think it's a good example. Every department will utilize the payroll services. I think we all agree on that, right? So when you look at, let's say, the street improvement fund, okay? That's where let's do a better one, water fund, where we provide our water services to the community, right? By allocating payroll service costs to the water fund, we know exactly now how much the water fund actually costs to run. Because if I was not providing payroll services to water fund, they still need to pay their people. So either I do it or they go out and purchase it from whoever, online software, a third party, whoever it be, a local accountant, whatnot. Okay. So either way, they need to be incurring those expenses to manage the payroll. So really, as Duncan had said, by me cross-charging my service costs of payroll to the water fund, you know how much it is to run the water fund. So then water fund then can go and look at their fees that that get approved by you all, that they charge to the customers. They can address that in the fee rate. They can increase it, decrease it, whatever needs to happen based off of the costs that go into it. Now, on the flip side, the general fund, if I do not allocate those funds over to the water fund, or those service costs to the water fund, you now absorb those costs in the general fund. The general fund can now do less with the money and resources available to it, because you've used those resources for all of payroll rather than allocating payroll costs to the different departments or funds. So if I charge $100,000 to the water fund, that alleviates $100,000 in the general fund. And it allows you to know it's $100,000 of payroll cost associated to the water fund. So you get a kind of a double, there's multiple benefits to it.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions, or Duncan or Chris, you want to add to that, or John? Okay. And then, so moving on to the next major line item is capital outlay. Capital outlay is typically your very large purchases. They're investments typically in assets that you use within the community. And the investment is usually a maintenance item, so you're maintaining your streets. You upgrade, so if you're doing streets, you might do curb cuts and for sidewalks and whatnot. So it's an upgrade, it's a new function. You might just repair, similar to maintenance, but repair is more if it breaks and you need to fix it. Okay, so on the library, HVAC is a continuing issue. It's continually breaking, so we're having to continually repair it. And then you also have the acquisition of items. Okay, for us, anything that's greater than $5,000 that meets the capital accounting expense requirements, we will capitalize it, and then that's what we will depreciate. Any questions here on capital before I move on? Okay. Moving on to grants. Now, major line item in grants. These are grants that the city of Cortez provides to the community. And for us, where you pretty much see grants as a major line item is in the city council department budget. Okay. Those are grants that you all will be presented to. People will, what I saw last year, people will have to apply for those grants, and you all will have to then allocate monies to them. So that's really where you only see grants is within your budget. The next item is debt service. This also is usually typically a large dollar amount, as it is for us. Debt service is at the end of the day, we have loans, we need to pay those loans. We have debt service across the multiple funds, okay? Water fund, for example, has quite a few debt service items. Depreciation is, so we talked about that capital outlay, right? And those capital assets. As those assets, as they go through time, they lose value, okay? The usability of those depreciates. So that's the depreciation. What you'll notice though is it gets kind of confusing. Depreciation is more well known in the corporate world because depreciation is what helps you reduce your revenue, and then it has tax impacts, right? It reduces your taxes owed. We're a government, we don't pay taxes. So where does depreciation come in for us, right? So what you'll see is in our government, in our general fund, which is a governmental operation, not our enterprise, but it's our governmental operations, we don't have depreciation in there. You won't see it as a major line item. But for our enterprise funds, like the Recreation Center Fund or the Water Fund, you'll see a depreciation line item there, okay? Here's how I look at it. It's a mechanism by which it forces you to put money away in your savings. It's a piggy bank type way, okay? So if you have all your revenues and expenses come in, and one of your expenses depreciation of 100,000, and you balance your budget, meaning revenues match expenses, that's zero. In essence, what you just did is you also put $100,000 away for the future to replace that asset or that asset class at a future time when it is no longer available to you. Any questions there? Okay, and just so you know, I see quite a few of you, it looks like you're taking notes. Great. These slides haven't been provided. You will be getting them. All right, so moving on here. Something that I wanted to share with you here is one of the new ways that I provided last
I
year.
believe John had a question or a comment.
Yeah.
I couldn't get off mute there, Ben. Can you go back to the prior page? One of the things I wanted to point out to the council, especially the new council members, those grants are a number that I believe we just budget what was there last year, and the prior year, and the prior year before that. It is completely discretionary to the council. I do believe you get the same applicants every year, year after year. I believe Dawn used to say, she'd be surprised there may be one new one, and then they wouldn't get funded because it's just a continuation. But I did want to point that out, that the grants is a completely discretionary line item in your budget. And Ben's right, it's generally in the council's budget.
And I think a point of clarification that I was educated on earlier this year was what's in this year's budget is what was approved by last year's spend, if that makes sense. So last year's council, in essence, approved the grants that were given out this year in January. Okay. So when you, at the end of the year, this year, when you go through your grant approval process, it'll be what's budgeted for next year. Okay. So this screen here is, let me just kind of give you a rundown, a context of what it's doing, what we're seeing here. Along the top, what we're starting with is a 2019 fund balance. Okay. And then we have the total revenues, the total expenditures, and then your projected fund balance for the end of the year. And then it's a repeat for 2021 and then 2022. Along the left-hand side is we have all the different funds that the city of Cortez has categorized by fund type. So our operating fund is the general fund. And let's just talk about the general fund for now. You'll notice I'm showing a fund balance right now of 0. That is intentional at this point because as we've talked about, because of the status of our audits, it is unclear what our real fund balance is. We know it's not 0, right? I'll give you an updated view later on in the slides here. It gives you an idea, maybe more realistic. It's not going to be exact because we need the audits complete. It gives you a better idea what it is. What I'm trying to show here is by starting off with a 0 fund balance, and then you show your revenues, and then your expenditures, you subtract the two, it said $91,500 deficit. A negative is a deficit in the balance column. Okay. That right now is saying either, and Duncan will get into his section about how fund balances and reserves and everything work. But this gives you an idea. Like right now, as you see, this is draft. This is where we're kind of at today. We have more work to go through the remainder of the process. We're looking at about maybe a $92,000 shortfall. Then when you get to 2021, again, it's your fund balance with your revenues and expenditures, and you have your new fund balance here, which is a $586,000 deficit there, all right? And that's accumulation of the 2020 fund balance plus the difference between your revenues and expenditures here to come up with 586. In 1231, with, again, it's building on the 586 fund balance of a deficit plus your differences here to come up with a $1.5 million deficit. And as we go down to all your different funds, you can see then if you just look out 2 years to 2022, how the condition, if you remember last week, Duncan was talking about your financial condition. This is one aspect of your financial condition. Your fund balances, how are they looking? How are they running? You know, if you look at water fund, you could probably say that you look at it and say it's looking fairly strong as we're progressing. Okay. Down here, you'll see the shop and technology fund. These are, again, if you remember, we talked about those intergovernmental charges. So the shop fund are services provided to like the general fund, the airport fund, refuse, water. The shop is not in it to make money. So whatever revenues, whatever expenses they have is what we should charge out. All right. So what you'll see is they balance to 0 because they should not be making money, so to speak. And then when we look at, when we look at the total down here, you can see the total of all funds. You're looking at estimated revenue of 28.6 million. Total expenditures or disbursements at 28.45, and then all funds at 230. That is just a global view. But one thing you have to keep in mind is the budget and the appropriations of the budget that you all approve will be at the fund level for all these other funds, or at the department level for the general fund. So this is just a high level bird's eye view. Because what has to happen is the general fund, in essence, has to stand alone on its budget versus actuals, as does the equipment fund or the street improvement fund. All right, moving on. Here's another basis I want to give you an idea what you'll be seeing in the budgets as we go forward. Again, it's draft based off of the current budgets that we've pulled together. Along the left-hand side, we'll have our large categories of revenues, and then we'll have how categories of those major line items of how those revenues are broken down. So we'll have our taxes, our license and permits, intergovernmental recreation programs, charges for services, fines and forfeits, interest, miscellaneous grants, interfund service revenues. Quickly, so you can understand taxes, that's primarily, again, like we talked about, the sales tax. It also has a little bit of property tax, but it has other major taxes such as marijuana taxes remitted back to the city from the state. It also has mineral and severance taxes that are collected and distributed by the state back to the city. License and permits, those are really fees that we charge to other for services that we provide to the community. Okay, liquor licenses, building permits, and such. Moving on down, I won't go through all of those, but moving on down to operating expenditures. You'll notice the operating expenditures is broken down by department. Okay, that's the high level department. What you'll see is, as we were talking about earlier, is when we go to approve the appropriation, the departments will also have more detail about the divisions, okay, where divisions exist. So for example, city council, it's only department, no divisions. City manager only has the city manager department, no divisions. But police has police department, but patrol, kennel, detectives, building divisions. So you'll see that. In the budget document, I do have it further broken out in that by detail as well for you, so you can see it there. Down below then, what we have are what we're calling other expenditures. These are, it'll be your capital purchases, okay? Typically in the past, if we've done a capital improvement in the past, it's been done through the general fund. So for example, if we were going to do the park for South Park build out, it would be out of the other expenditure capital item here. With that said, one of the things we've noticed last year that we have to amend, we're just not there yet because of incremental changes that we have to implement as we go, is we will have a separate fund called like a capital improvement fund. What should happen is all the capital improvement purchases should go through that other fund, and we should no longer see it in here. But for now, for consistency's sake, we're showing it. Your grants programs, this is that grants major line item that I was talking about. That these are the grants that were that you all council members will approve and appropriate to the community. And then we have our Roger Smith debt service that comes out of here, and then depreciation is 0. But what you can see then is at the very bottom is, well, let me take a step up. You have your total revenue here at the top, your total operating expenditures by department, your total other expenditures. And when you take your total revenue, subtract your total expenditures, you have your change in net position, or what you might think of as your net revenue, your bottom line. And that's where you see the approved budget. Look, second column in, the approved budget that John and staff worked so hard at last year to balance. It balances revenues match expenses, so there's 0. Whereas next year, the revised budget for this year is it's looking at about a $91,000 deficit, $494 deficit next year, $955 the following year in 2022. So you're going to see this format consistently as we go through, as you go through the budget, as it comes, the document comes to you. There will also be continued more detail as well that you'll see. Any other questions at this moment?
So with that being in the negative, does that mean reserves are going to be used to cover the difference?
I'm going to leave that conversation to Duncan because he's going to address it in his section. That's why I'm giving you this prelude so you can see kind of where we stand today. So as Duncan gets into his section, you can start thinking about the tools you have in your belt to address that deficit. Okay.
I might just mention, Ben, is that just like you were saying, Duncan's going to go over the different options that council has, but you as council get to determine if you're going to use your reserves, borrow, or even just say, no, we're making cuts. So there's lots of different options, but those decisions come down to council.
Moving on to the next slide is something as well. Yep.
The other, I would like to add, for the new council members, this isn't a new look to a budget and things. For the old council members, it is a little different look from last year. The reason for this is, one of the goals I set for Ben was a distinguished budget award from the Government Finance Officers Association. And then once we get cleaned up and done, I want to start getting CAFRs from GFOA also. One of the goals, and this is why the changes to the budget document very transparent. And as Ben said, what you see here, you know, we can go into much detail if council wants to. Every one of these numbers makes up a lot smaller numbers, and we can get into that detail if you ever want to. But be presented to the public.
Right. Thank you, John. And so on this, what you'll couple major, not major, formatting changes you'll notice is just the headers, right? Last year, because it was new, we needed to take incremental steps, is we didn't do a revised budget because appropriations set in the prior year were already reasonable. They didn't need to be changed. But this year, we're showing it. We're doing a revised budget, which was planned before COVID hit. And I'm glad we had the structure because COVID is going to require revised amendments to the budget. Remember that living document component we talked about earlier. So we can see the revised. So that's a new column. The other item is the 2022 budget. We haven't done 2 years out. I think it's something that had been done quite a few years ago, but we haven't been done it not in the recent or midterm recent past. So it's one of those things to bring out. So you can kind of get an idea if you're looking at a continuation budget from 21 to 22 with maybe just a cost of living increase, what that is. So how does that impact your 2022 budget? And then you all can say, hey, these are the priorities I have. I want to increase the service level of service that we're providing. You can then see how that might impact a department and how your balanced budget may or may operate going forward. So a lot of these things are just comparison for year over year to give you context on a trend, how we've been operating. Okay. This next page is, again, there's a few new columns from what's last year. This is still in progress. It may not provide all these columns. And all the columns is you'll have your 2018 actuals, your 2019 actuals, and they're unaudited actuals, just to be clear. Okay, because when you have the audit, you do make minor, you do make adjustments for accounting purposes. And then we have the approved budget, and then we have the 2020 actuals, your 2020 approved budget, your revised budget for 2020, 2020 budget, or excuse me, 2021 budget, and your 2022 budget. That's just a lot of information when you look at column headers that we may cut back on some of those just so you don't get lost in the numbers. Then on the left-hand side, again, what we're looking at are those major line items. That gives you an idea then, as this table here we're looking at is specific for the general fund, okay? So then as you're looking at the general fund, you can say, all right, personnel expenses for the revised 2020 budget is 7.2 million. Well, 7.2 million of 11, that's about 60 to 65% of your total disbursements. So it helps give you an idea of context of where the monies are being, what major line items are they being allocated to. Now, going down here is the same, it's just another look, but what I've done is it's the same major line items that we just saw, but going across the top, okay? With then a total disbursements on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side again is all the different classifications of funds with the fund that's within it. So again, our general fund is here at the top. And then down below, next we have our enterprise funds, those funds that are meant to run like a business, the internal service funds, or special revenue funds. And what this again is, it allows you to look across the city what major line items have the expenses, have the disbursements, where's the money going? Just another view for you to put it in comparison. And that is it. Are there any questions before we move on, or clarifications, or yeah? All right, with that, I'll hand it over to Chris. You're on mute. Hey, Chris, you're on mute.
I need to turn it on.
Yeah.
We're going to go into the next session where Duncan's going to review where we are now, budget process, balancing the budget, some of your options are, what is a balanced budget, steps to get there, managing a fund, and what are appropriations. And so with that, I'll let Duncan take over.
Thank you, Chris. Very well done, Ben and Chris, in setting the stage here. I think it's important that we recall back the term that we keep using and what my role in this is. I'm here to be sort of the Greek chorus in the background that is continually talking about best practice. Best practice is what has evolved across all municipalities as consolidated and identified, generally speaking, by the Government Finance Officers Association. They've been around a long time. This best practice framework is what's emerged out of trial and error that protects council in your fiduciary role and protects staff in its execution role. I cannot underscore that enough. And last year, John initiated an overall objective that we're going to continue to move back to best practice. We've sort of tended to get away over the years, and we see the mess that has gotten us into. So best practice protects the organization, it protects council as we move forward. So you'll hear me talking about over and over again, what is best practice, which is not necessarily where you are now, although in many cases you are there or very close to there. So that transitioning to best practice is going to take time. You're talking years, 3, 4, 5 years. You'll see substantial differences each year as you improve. But it also is going to irritate some people in the organization because we're talking about changing and frankly tightening the way we do things. Folks, on your watch, you do not want another issue like you had from 2015 and 16. And the ramifications of that are still years away from being resolved. So let's set the mechanics in place, let's set the concepts in place and stay away from it. Well, next slide, please. We've talked a little bit, and this is a quick review. What is our economic context for the budget in 2020? And I'm going to say very gently again, It's about the big picture. We're talking about 2020. We peel the onion down to the very center, but that center of the onion is in a much bigger picture. Right now, what's immediately in front of us is, of course, COVID-19. Next. Then next. Thank you. It's affecting our national economy. Next. And it is unique in history. There is no precedence for moving forward. So your staff, your city manager is looking to try to guide the ship through waters that have never been sailed before. Next. There's great uncertainty about what the full nature, direct, indirect, and indirect of these impacts will be, and when they will show up, and how long. Next. How long they're going to take, how many surges we're going to see, and what is the nature of the recovery in the economic community that we have here. This is what drives your revenues. And as we will see and continue to focus on, you start with revenues and then you fit to your expenditures and you go back and forth. So understanding what our revenues are likely to be in the next several years, well beyond COVID-19. You're looking at the reduction in your mineral and extraction taxes, which are a substantial portion of your monies, as CO2 starts drying up and the domes are pumped out, but also as the price of gasoline continues to stay low and the oil and gas excise taxes are down. Next. So exactly how then it's going to affect and when and to what degree, we really don't know at this time. So we're making a best guess. Next. And if I want to underscore one term, it's about adaptive management. It's the capacity for you as council to make those mid-course adjustments as we go through and as things unfold and play out. So what, as Chris and Ben are saying, what's the toolbox that you and staff have to continually adjust and stay afloat in this period of uncertainty? Next. We've talked about the importance of a balanced budget. What is a balanced budget? Now let's understand this very, very clearly. Its total appropriated revenues must equal or exceed the total appropriated expenditures. It's implied by your charter, it's stated in state statutes, and it is a universal best practice. Total appropriated revenues. We've got a slide that we're going to talk about. What is an appropriation? You've heard us using this word. And how is it different from cash and other kinds of issues we're talking about? Next. This total appropriated revenues must equal or exceed total appropriated expenditures is for each and every one of your funds. It's not a total across the budget. It's for each individual bucket that you have a fund. Next. Unfortunately, budgets don't automatically balance themselves. Next. They're crafted through a great deal of effort and work across all of your departments and your city manager, and frankly, what's often a very intense process, because there's a struggle going on as to who gets what resources, given that they have a lot of needs out there that need to be met. And guess who's the captain of this ship? City Council. You make the decisions of who gets how much and who didn't get how much in that decision process. Next. Because we're in a recession and a very uncertain period, this is an even bigger challenge. It basically means a possibility or increasing likelihood of the continuation budget being reduced. What do I mean again by continuation budget? It's the same amount of dollars that it would take this year to execute the services that we provided last year at the same level of service. What's a level of service? It's what quality and the amount of product that's buried in a service. For example, if the library is only open 32 hours a week versus being open 60 hours a week, it's library service, but 60 hours is considerably higher level of service than 32 hours and considerably more expensive. You as the council set those levels of service, and they're embedded in that budget and in your management plan as you move forward. Next. Cuts may have to be made relative to the previous year. We don't know yet. We don't know yet whether you even have to make cuts relative to the continuation budget. And we don't certainly know the magnitude at this time, because that story is still unfolding. Next. Both council and manager staff participate in this process. The worst thing that you folks can do is not understand your budget and then simply approve a vote to approve the budget and move forward, and then have all kinds of issues come up that you didn't understand as you move forward. So please, if there's one place you have to try to really dig in, it's right here, and that's why we're investing this time to work with you. Next. So let's talk about the process of balancing the city's budget. Right now, the task of balancing that budget is in staff's hands, and they're going to then bring you a balanced budget at a certain point in time as we go forward. Typically in October or November, you by charter have to have approved basically by December 1st for a budget. So let's talk about it. Let's use it as an example of the general fund. First of all, we're going to look to appropriate. That's legally authorized. Appropriation means legally authorized. We're going to appropriate revenues on the as the first step in putting together a balanced budget. Next. So we're going to estimate a general fund revenue structure for the year 2020. And one of the first components in there is the beginning fund balance. And we're going to talk what that fund balance is and what it allows you to do and not do, and the challenges that you've got with yours. But the beginning fund balance is basically the ending fund balance of the previous year. So you finally run your numbers, you look at your revenue, you subtract your expenses. That is, hopefully you have a small surplus, and that surplus is the ending fund balance that finally on the last day of the year you have left in the bucket. And then you reach over and take that, what's left in the bucket, and you plug it in as the beginning balance for the next year. So you start with the beginning fund balance, you move then to estimated taxes, you move then to estimated license and permits, and you go right down that list that Ben showed you earlier, down to the bottom list of estimated interfund service, and you get your estimated total revenues. Now, this estimation process during the staff phase is done month to month, week to week, as you get closer and closer to it adopting the budget, again, projecting forward to 2021. Now that's one half of the ledger. Next. What's the second piece? It's the expenditures, and it's a separate process that goes through working to detail out what are the expenditures we're anticipating for the city clerk, the city manager's office, all the way down that list to the bottom one on the list, the welcome center expenditures, step by step. And the basis this year that you're using is a continuation budget. That's the starting point. Again, the same level of service that was delivered last year. If we move it forward this year, we adjust for cost of living, because we adjust for cost of certain supplies, for example, energy costs or petroleum costs. That is your continuation budget. That does not mean that you have to have that as the same level of service. You as council can reach into any one of these and say, we want to increase this or we want to decrease this. But then you move over to the revenue side, and you've got to then find the revenue sides that's going to then help you cover that gap as you move forward. Next. We're going to talk about what's called the ending unrestricted unencumbered fund balance in a minute, because that fund balance number at the top is actually a little more sophisticated, as you might expect, and a little more complicated than what it appears just as a single box right there. But it is the key to moving forward with your budget. Next. So next, we're going to take that total revenues that we've estimated over here, including the beginning fund balance, and we're going to subtract our estimated general fund total expenditures to get an estimated ending fund balance. And we do that for each one of, I think it's 13 funds that you have. So the staff is preparing that as this part of the season right now becomes peak season. So now let's focus then, okay, here is basically the structure of what we do to balance a budget. What then can council do to make sure that the budget is balanced? What if our revenues are going to come in lower than the expenditures that we would like to have to continue that level of service, to say nothing of increasing the level of service as we move forward? So next, here is a flow diagram of the decision process that will guide the process that you're looking at. So for this year, 2020, we start. And for each fund, we estimate the beginning fund balance, the revenue that is going to be generated in that fund, and the continuation level department expenditures. And we move forward to say, is it balanced? Do the numbers that I bring up, is it balanced? That means over here in the gray that you see that it's equal to or greater than $0 in terms of the revenue side. It's not negative. I can have more dollars appropriated than I think I'm going to have expenditure, but I at least have to have them equal. If the answer is no, you have three fundamental capabilities to adjust the budget into balance. You can try to increase revenues. Now let's talk about that. We're going to get that in the next slide as we move forward about what your options are, because they're very limited, unfortunately. You can decrease expenditures. You can reach into the departments. You can adjust levels of service to reduce the amount of the expenditure involved in it, or you can simply cut across the board, decreasing the expenditures as you move forward. Or you can draw on reserves, okay? Draw on reserves. And in any event, you continue this process until you come out the left side and it is a yes, it's a balanced budget, you take it to council. And you as council may actually make adjustments. You say, no, we want more program here, or we want to change this fee structure over here. And then they hand it back to staff and they come back, go through this same process over here, making recommendations and say, okay, if this is what you want to do, here's what you recommend as a way to fund those adjustments that you want to make. And if it is balanced at that point, you see you go through the loop and you basically move forward and you are, you then go to your appropriation, your annual appropriation ordinance, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this is a general flow diagram of what your role will be as you go forward, between staff doing the same process, handing it to you as a balanced budget. You may unbalance it and say, no, we want more of this and less of that, and ask staff to try to make sure that we can balance it. They'll come back and give you suggestions on what can be done. You make a decision and move forward then with the final budget. Next slide. So let's talk then about the role of the fund balance, which is one of the most critical tools that you have in the toolkit. And this is the absolute heart of government finance. The fund balance is totally outside the world of private sector financial management. It is unique to public sector because fund structure is unique to the public sector. Next. The key to the fund balance is this term, and it's something we need to get familiar with: the unrestricted, unencumbered fund balance. So it's not just fund balance, it's the unrestricted and the unencumbered part of the fund balance that is what your discretionary capabilities of fund balance resolve down to. So let's explain that again. Next. Let's go back to our illustration using the general fund. Next. As we said, it applies to every fund. We're going to now go down and peel the onion and get a little bit more advanced. That beginning fund balance, the surplus that came over at the end of the year, can be of two distinctly different forms. The first is the restricted fund balance. Next. The restricted fund balance is a discretionary designation that you as council can put on a fund balance at any time. And that is, you can say, we've got a $4 million fund balance. We want $2 million of that designated as reserves and are not to be used except in an emergency. You can do that in a resolution, or you can actually do that by ordinance. You alone can restrict it. You're not required to do that, but you can do that as a policy statement. You then, the remaining portion is unrestricted. And that means it's a discretionary at that point in time. Does that make sense? You see the distinction there. Now you can remove the restriction on there by council vote. It's entirely up to the council, but by earmarking that, it puts a flag on it and says, no, this is going to be used for this specific purpose. Next.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Duncan. And right now, our code says 20% of expenditures are to be reserved, or are, let me rephrase that, are restricted.
The fund balance should, by
20% of the fund,
fund
yeah,
balance should equal 20% of the expenditure.
thank
Now,
you.
let me give you that as a.
And that only applies to our general fund at this point.
For what?
That only applies to our general fund.
Right. Now, let me give you context. Many places use 2 to 5%. So I'm stunned at the 20% number. It's a huge number. But again, that's a charter issue, and that's something we're just going to have to struggle with. Next. There we go. So basically then that beginning fund balance, let's make sure we've got this in our head. It's not just from the previous year, is it? Because each year, going all the way back to 1902, when the city of Cortez was founded and chartered, it's basically the cumulative surpluses, up and down through the years. That is basically what comes forward. Last year was simply what we had took the previous year and made adjustments to, and that previous year was the previous year to it, et cetera. So it's accumulation over time that leads us to this thing called the beginning fund balance. Next. So it's all of the revenues that are going to be received into that fund, or receipts that are going to be received in 2020. Go ahead. Minus the disbursements that are going to be made for all of the expenditures related to that specific fund. Next. Plus a point, that an amount of dollars that's left in the pot for what we call outstanding encumbrances. Now let's talk about this word encumbrance. It's right there in your charter. An encumbrance is a protection. It basically says when the year starts and the new budget starts on January the 1st, best practice says we go in and we identify contracts that are going to be dispersed over the course of the year. And we encumber, or we reserve an amount in the fund equal to all of those contracts. Why is that important? Because you're going to be you're filling the bucket for January the 1st over the top of what was the balance left over. So you had a small part in the bottom of the bucket. You dumped in the authorization to spend up and fill the bucket. But the first thing you want to identify, what are those contracts that are going to be dispersed? Because the last thing you want to do is get to the end of the year and have dispersed all kinds of monies, and then somebody comes in and says, oh, we've got this other encumbrance, we've got this other contract that the last invoice is yet to come in, and we need 30,000 for this contract and another 40,000 for that, and you're out of money. We're going to point out in the next slide, an appropriation is not a cash flow. Appropriation and cash are two different things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is a protection. Basically, another way of doing this is using your purchase order, so that every contract and every obligation that the city knows it has, at the moment it incurs that obligation, you make sure you have a purchase order. And that purchase order then becomes, in effect, a reservation against what you're going to need, but only so long as the finance department is tracking that. and then saying to each department, and each department head is tracking that and say, I've got to have this amount of money in my budget at any given time to be able to pay for all of those outstanding. And as you go through the year, those contracts get used up. So the amount that is encumbered, or the amount that needs to be reserved, if you will, and I don't mean in reserve in the former slide sense, that we need to assure is there, is getting reduced down and down and down until the end of the year. Whatever is outstanding still has not been paid. Let's say I get a Cassell contract for $30,000, but $10,000 worth of that effort has not been completed by the end of the year. Well, that 10,000 rolls forward and becomes an appropriation to continue that contract the next year. You see what we're doing with this? So best practice says you need to have a PO and or an encumbrance system, and city budget systems or city financial management systems, city organized, have encumbrances in them. Now, you may not be quite ready yet to move into encumbrances. That's up to John and his team to determine. But you need to at least tighten up on your purchase orders so that you have a purchase order and controls right there in place to help make sure that you're leaving that money in the budget to be able to pay at the time they come due. Next. So that then, if I take all of my revenues and I take all of the disbursements and then set aside a portion for outstanding encumbrances that gets played down, then I have an ending total fund balance. Next. So this becomes the ending fund balance for 2020, which then carried forward immediately as the beginning fund balance for 2021. Now, you're not going to know the actual fund balance until your audit is completed and it actually verified. You should be able to estimate to the dollar what it is, because you have controls over what is outstanding and what you spent. But it actually is not officially available to you until that audit is done. And therein lies the problem that you have. And we're going to talk about this. This is one of the most powerful tools, because that unrestricted fund balance becomes a way that you cover the immediate short-term deficit this year. You reach into that fund balance and say, we're going to underwrite it this year. We're not going to try to cut levels of service or disbursements, but we're going to reach into this area. But the problem that we have unique to City of Cortez is we don't know exactly what those fund balances were in 2016 and 2017. So we'll talk more about that as we move forward this evening. Next. Tracking this fund balance is a continuous process. So that's that report that Ben spent so much time going over. Tracking that. This is the oversight function that we need to talk about the city council. You are as responsible for that fund balance and that appropriation position just as much as John and Ben and the staff members that are out there.
So if you don't mind, Duncan, giving an example for you, how we're showing it for you is you look at that monthly financial report that I'm providing to you. I'm giving you a very simplified view into what that fund balance of how it's going to increase or decrease month over month. That's because what I'm showing you is your net revenue and your net expenditure, and it gives you that net change. That net change, whether it's a surplus or deficit, is in essence what you're adding or subtracting to the fund balance that we start at the beginning of the year. So that's a way for you to simply and quickly see it by looking, what's that change?
And to underscore that, every single time there is a purchase or every single time there is a receipt of revenue, your fund balance is changing. Okay, that's how dynamic this is. So that's the juggling act that your staff is keeping in front of you at all times. Next. So this now gets back to understanding the word appropriation, one of the most important words that you'll put into your vocabulary. It is a legal act of council. You will issue a specific annual appropriation ordinance that in that appropriation ordinance authorizes the city manager through staff to disperse funds and to enter contracts up to the level of the appropriation. So this is an authorization to spend or to invest, as we would prefer. Next. The appropriations occur by departments and major divisions within those. Ben has already gone through that and illustrated it. You'll see it in your budget structure. That ordinance then actually appropriates down to those departments and major division levels, but not to the major line item levels. What this means is if you need to move money from the police detectives to police patrol, there needs to be a budget amendment, okay? But if within the detectives, you need to move money from equipment and supplies into personnel, that's within the authority of the city manager and through staff through the city manager. That authority does not need to come at that level from city council, but to move it from detectives to patrol across a major division, that requires a budget amendment. Next. Revenues and expenditures are each appropriated. It's not just one bundle. You are appropriating revenues and you're appropriating expenditures. Next. And this is probably the most important takeaway from this. Appropriations are not the same as cash in hand. So because I have an authority to spend does not mean I have that cash sitting in the bucket. You see where I'm coming with this? It is very possible to legally overspend where available cash and underspend the appropriation. I could not you could easily conceive of a situation where I don't reach my appropriation. I'm not exceeding my appropriation at all, but cash was so bad that I've made all kinds of commitments that I don't have the cash flow to support. So there is an extremely important piece of the puzzle here to make sure that the cash in hand and the appropriations are walking hand in hand as it goes forward. Again, that's part of your financial management process and system that's in play. Are there any questions about that?
I have a comment on that, though. For the council members, that would be extremely hard for us to run out of cash because normally that would happen if you're dependent on your property taxes, which are paid twice a year. And you do have a problem when you get close to there. That's a very important fund balance use. But for us, since we get monthly sales tax, we get regular cash in, so it's not a problem for us.
Unless something occurs in the economy that completely disturbs the amount of cash that is actually available to come in from the economy. And that's why the COVID-19 could be one of those kinds of things. That's the reason we want to point this out. Next.
So Duncan, what do we do in a case like that?
Basically, you look to your operating expenses, and that's why your fund balance reserve is so critical. That's why your fund balance reserve, you want to try to end the year, even appropriate a little bit more revenue than you have expenses so that you are as sure as you can be that you're going to have money left over at the end of the year to carry forward and continue to try to build up or at least maintain that beginning fund balance in a positive manner.
So I think just to reiterate maybe something Duncan has said, just to bring it forward again for discussion is when you have down times like now, right? The economy's down, COVID and whatnot, you can dip into the reserves to use, that's a method by which you could use then to fill the gap between revenues and expenses, right? But then that also means then you need the discipline in good times to make sure you're setting some monies aside to weather those challenging times. So David, it sounded like you had another question.
Still, my question is, this is unprecedented. So, we're kind of in a spider web here, trying to figure out how we're going to maintain enough funds to sustain what we are obligated to. Does that make sense?
Oh, it definitely does, David. And let me give you some examples. Typically, the first thing that if you see that revenues are not coming in at the level that you thought, the first thing you're going to do is shut down travel and equipment that hasn't yet been purchased, those kinds of things that aren't immediately needed. You see what I mean? The second thing you do then would be to freeze any empty positions so that there's no new staff that are being added that would add to payroll at that point in time. But the next steps now get more and more serious. The next steps would be you lay people off. Nobody wants to say that. Nobody wants to think about it. But that's the kind of thing, that's why you have to be out in front. And that's why you have guys like John and Ben at the helm. You're paying them the bucks to have that best practice process in place, that they see what's coming up. These aren't just numbers, they're stories. I have to underscore that. It's the story of what's going on and what's happening so that it raises flags in time to take that action. Does that help, David?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Something
I-
that I'm mindful of in my position, and I'm sure John is, I won't speak for him, is I'm always looking out at a minimum a year ahead from the financial position, right? So if you're talking about a story, you remember that concept of foretelling? What are you at now and how can you see what the end's going to be? It's kind of the role we're trying to play at this point. The challenge, though, is the story that we're in right now. There's so many balls being juggled in the air that it's okay. Which is the key piece for me to focus on that's going to make the decision, or And by the way, I'm not making the decision, but I'm providing the information to you all so you can make that decision.
The single most important thing, David, that you can help track is understanding, are our revenue projections on track by fund? If they're not, that is an immediate yellow flag. Now, there are always going to be sags and ups and downs, as John was saying. That's just part of the nature of some of these different sources, twice a year for sales tax example. But seeing what is in those and knowing that you're sensitive to that, you may back off a little more in these times and give yourself even more latitude to move forward.
I see.
I just wanted to add a couple of things here too, is that John and Ben are trying to prognosticate what's going to occur in the economy. And they may or may not be as conservative or look forward, be less spendthrifty than you might think the situation incurs. So it's not just like you turn it all over to them and walk away and go, oh, we just take what you want, what you think. They really need to rely on you as council people to say, we don't want to be caught in a bad situation. We want you to be more conservative. Or you may come back and say, I think things are loosening up. I'm listening to what's going on in the community. All the business people I talk to are going great guns. You need to ease up a little bit and spend a little more. So you need to be in tune as to what's going on, not only locally in the economy, but what's happening in the state so that the city of Cortez doesn't get caught. So it's not just John and Ben making those prognostications for you and you blindly following along. You need to prod them a little bit too. If you think, we need to take more steps, we need to be more conservative, or vice versa. So,
and along those lines, to help you all with your decisions is trying to give you the tools. So a great example of that is if you look at the impact to COVID-19 analysis that was done back in April, it details out how we came up with the assumptions that drove the revised revenues that we're seeing. Okay. Those assumptions were out there for you to review and see them so you can question them. So you can say, you know what, Ben, you're too conservative, or you know what, you're not conservative enough, right? So as we go month by month, I'm still providing you with a quick analysis to show you, hey, here's what we initially budgeted, here's what the revised revenues were, here's where it's actually coming in at. just to give you the information you need so you can have input and derive those decisions. Now, right now, we're taking steps, but that ultimate decision is with you all. And if you don't get the info, that's where, you know, we'll get you the answers. I might not have it at that moment. John may not have it at that moment. We may need to go away and then come back to you to give you a responsible answer.
Ben, next. Ben's point is absolutely dead on. Cash flow, therefore, must be carefully managed, continually projected to assure that this does not happen. That is the single most important thing, David, that gives you a flag as to what's going on. And just understanding the story that's being told.
I hear you. Thank you.
You bet. Next. So what if you see that the story has changed from what was originally embedded in the budget? You make adjustments, okay? You make adjustments in the budget appropriation. They're called budget amendments, and they are also legal steps. As you change the appropriations, you may reduce the appropriation on revenues, and you may reduce the appropriations to the line departments. Again, that is authorization. In fact, it's more than authorization. It's direction to your city manager and staff to go out and invest those monies, as you have said, in the recreation arena, in the library, in public works, in police, in the water department. You've directed staff to do that. And so if that changes, you've got to retract that direction and authorization. Does that make sense? All right, next. At this point, we're going to turn it back over to Ben, and we're going to get into this beginning fund balance and the challenges we have with 2015, 2016 issues that we've got. But I want to make one comment. You have an impressive senior staff. You've got John, you've got Ben. These guys are knowledgeable, they're experienced, you have excellent department heads that sit under them. They need your support, and you need a dialogue as you move forward. It's not an adversarial situation. It's a dialogue and a discussion as you move forward. And that summarizes my comments at this point. Ben?
Thanks. What I'm bringing back up here is the same slide that we saw before, where I had, oops, excuse me, sorry. The funds along the left-hand side, again, categorized by fund type. So again, there's your general fund along the top, your enterprise funds broken down the side. Then we had your fund balance. We started with our 2019 fund balance. And then if you move over to the right, again, there's your estimated revenues for the revised budget. And then our estimated expenditures for the revised budget for 2020. And then we have our projected ending fund balance, okay? And then we go into our following years, proposed revenues for 21, proposed expenditures 2021, with your revised fund balance at the end of the year, which becomes your beginning balance for 2022. And then you have your ending fund balance. So again, I'm showing you multiple years so you can see the impact that every year has upon the fund balance as it moves forward through time. The difference that I'm showing here now is I'm providing an estimated fund balance. This column here that you see was 0. So we talked about, and the numbers here have come from, again, they're unaudited, they're loosey-goosey, you know, technical terms again there, right? Is because they're unaudited, we don't have 100% confidence that this is the right number. But, you know, plus or minus 5–10%, that's pretty good. And you know, if you're talking 10% on 4 million, that's 400K that we're talking about. That's not that bad.
I would just note, just make sure you're oriented, that's the ending fund balance of 2019. That's what we ended the year with and are bringing forward for the beginning of this year. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Duncan. So that's where we're starting off with. And it's based off of budgeted numbers that have been budgeted through the years up until from prior to myself and then to last year, just taking what was kind of given. So what we're showing is if you look at general fund, we're talking about maybe a $4.2 million fund balance. 20% of that fund balance has to be reserved. Excuse me, you said it perfect earlier, Duncan. I got it mixed up in my head again. 20% of total expenditures has to be reserved in the fund balance here. That's by our code. Okay, so you're talking, I'm just going to round $900,000 that has to be reserved. Is that right? Yeah. At a $4.2 million fund balance. Okay. Now, then what we do is we move on to say, okay, if that's your fund balance to start, our revenues are coming in at 11.2 million is what we're projecting. And that's with COVID impact at this point. But our expenses are 11.3. Remember, that's where we saw the $91,500 deficit to that we're showing for that year, revenues minus expenses. Well, that 91.5 in this view is what it would look like if you filled that gap, that deficit, with your fund balance. So in essence, 4291 right here, 4.2 million minus 91.5 gives you 4.199 million.
That means that you're drawing down your fund balance by the end of the year. Rather
Right.
than building it up, you're drawing it down. But remember, that is one of the reasons that the fund balance is there.
And as you see that continuing into 2021 as well, it's continued drawdown. It goes from a beginning fund balance for 21 to an ending fund balance of 21 to 3.7. So it's a drawdown. It's because that deficit that's incurred. So that's where the guidance that we've been hearing is, if you go back to the tools in your tool belt, what do you want to use? Do you want to use the fund balance to cover the gap? Do you want to modify services? Do you want to modify the service level quality? Do you want to impact one of the various major line items we talked about, right? Do you want to reduce contracts? Do you want to reduce personnel costs? Do you want to reduce materials and supplies? And there's different ways you can go about that, right? And that's, so as we progress through time, if we keep on this path that we have initially drafted, we're going in by the beginning, going from 2019 ending balance, or your 2020 beginning balance of 4.2 million. By the end of 2022, your ending balance, fund balance, will be drawn down from 4.2 down to 2.7.
That means if you had a major fire or a major disaster, that's the reduction, that's what you would have left to try to resolve anything that is totally unexpected and is of a major, major impact.
And I might add in here, I think this is one of the things that you as council people really have to think about, so that you can advise John, Ben, the folks that are developing the budget. What do you feel comfortable with as having a fund balance? You know, how much do you need to have on hand to handle, let's just say, a major aspect, an occurrence here in the community? Realizing at the same time that the city of Cortez is not a bank. So we're not saving money just to save it. And so that's where you come in and go, you know, we feel an appropriate amount is X. You know, it's, if we're spending 12 million, is 4 million fine? Do we need to try and keep it there? Or does it need to be higher? Or should it be lower? So I think there's some real thought that needs to be given and some direction that will help John and Ben as they move forward, especially after the audits finally get completed, as to what should be in there. But it's nice to know that, no, the city of Cortez is not broke, that John and Ben are trying to manage the accounts and the various funds so that you don't overspend one of them and have to pay it back from another fund. And that's why they're being fairly conservative at this point, to go, you know, it's almost easier to plan to say, hey, our fund balances were zero, because then we know we're not going to be taking more money out of one fund than is actually there, and you have to pay it back. So you may feel better and go, let's overspend a certain percent, that's fine. But that's where they need your guidance.
I think Arlena had a question quickly, Duncan.
Yeah, so Ben, what is the 20% that we need in reserves?
It's 20%. I misspoke a little bit before when I said it was 800,000. It's 20% of your estimated revenues, expenditures. So in this case, it'd be 20% of your 11.3 million, which is about 2.2 million. Duncan?
I was going to point out there are two major threats that exist to any community. One is natural events that can cause great destruction, and the other is a collapse of the economy due to recession or even depression. The former can be managed through risk management. That is, you can insure yourselves with different innovative types of insurance practices that may, in fact, allow you to reduce your fund balance or to at least move that fund balance over to the former. Economic collapse and revenues not coming in, particularly for a protracted period, is not something you buy insurance for. But you can buy insurance through a risk management policy to protect you against such things as catastrophic fires, et cetera. And you may want to consider that so that your reserves amounts are protected through this insurance structure.
Something I'll just point out for consideration is we're talking about, there's a trend that we are seeing from the revised budget, the 2021 budget, the 2022 budget. You have a deficit every year. There's a trend there, okay? And if you, for those of you who were here last year, the budget, you previous council members, you remember John and I worked very hard with the staff to have a balanced 2020 approved budget. To get to that balanced budget where revenues met expenditures, there were cuts that various departments had to make. Some departments showed up and cut more than others. Okay, I would say it was not necessarily equitable. Some did great, some did not. You're continuing to see that as we go forward, even in our year, in the revised budget, in the 2021 budget, and the 2022 budget. So yes, part of our deficit is it's occurring because of reduced revenues from primarily COVID at this time and the potential recession, right? And that reduced revenue is in the form of sales taxes. It's reduced revenue in the programs of rec center programs because they're not being open. Some permits and fees are reduced because we're not doing as much building per se. And then, as Duncan has also said, the decrease in mineral and severance taxes that are remitted to the city from the state. That is a portion of it. That's a portion of why we have the deficit. Another question is, well, expenditures, if expenditures are expenditures, then they're, right now, I'll tell you, is majority of just, what's the term? Just not discrepancy spend. Monies that you don't have to spend because it's not you're going to forego a project. You're going to discretionary. Thank you. The discretionary spend of monies is pretty much out at this point. Okay. There might be some discretionary, but it's minor in nature, in detail. That's kind of comes to those, what are the various expenses that you can draw on to reduce, right? That I think, David, you were asking Duncan, and Duncan had said, hey, look, travel and training, equipment purchases, whatever else there were. And if you remember, when John took to council back in April, a budget modification discussion, which was, hey, we brought $900,000 of cost savings to the table. already for the 2020 revised budget. We're still short about $90,000 right this year. That means your discretionary spend is pretty limited. We don't have much left. So as we dig in, I just want you to have that in your thoughts as we go forward. How do you think about it? So any other questions or discussions at this point? We'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, Ben, I have one. I actually have two. So talking about, so the charter says that the restricted amount is that 20%, which you brought up as 11.3 million, which correlates to, or from that 11.3 million, which correlates to the 2.2 million that is supposed to be restricted. So in instances like depression or, catastrophic or, natural disasters, could that come to a vote to be able to dip into that 2.2? Since we're not a bank, does that, talk to me about that.
Yeah, and as Duncan, feel free to elaborate as well. But as Duncan spoke earlier, it comes down to that restriction is an appropriation set by council, right? And that 20% is for emergency purposes. And if council deems that there is a certain event that occurs that creates emergency, you need to dip into that. That would be a decision council can make.
Okay, so it come to a vote. Okay, great. And then the next thing, I kind of had a little shock when he mentioned that we don't have insurance coverage for catastrophic events. Is that?
No,
I don't know.
No, fair
Kind of
enough.
made my heart rate go up.
No, the city is insured.
Okay.
We do have insurance. What the point Duncan was making, and Duncan, again, feel free to clarify, is you can manage your risk associated to catastrophic events or even day-to-day events. A trash truck hits a car in the street.
Yeah.
We are insured for that, okay? But to insure yourselves from an economic downturn such as recession or depression and resulting in loss of revenues, really can't insure yourselves for that. I'm sure you can go to Berkshire Hathaway and get an insurance for that, but you're going to pay a lot of money for it, would be my guess.
Rachel, yes, but what I was also saying is that you as council need, during the budget process, review the levels of insurance that you have and make sure that you're comfortable with the risk-consequence relationship, the risk-cost relationship there. I don't know when the last, all I was saying, I don't know when the last time that anybody reviewed this was. You can either be self-insured through your reserves, or you can buy professional insurance, or you have a mix. And all I'm saying is your job is to make sure you're comfortable that you're adequately covered either through self-insurance in the reserves or through commercial or a mix.
Okay. Duncan, this is Amy speaking again. So then would a suggestion that you could make would be that we could, as a council, look into talking with an insurance agent or company to expand our coverage? Would that be a good suggestion?
I would start first with simply a risk review. And that simply says, here are your different policies that you have, here's what they cover, and here's the different levels that they have. Basically, that's what you have the city manager and staff for, is to ask them and to bring back to you. Now, they're not going to bring it back in the next 20 minutes or anything, but they can conduct a study and analysis and present to you for your knowledge. And then you as a council review and say, we're uncomfortable, or we're very comfortable, or we think in this area, we need to make those amendments.
Okay.
To
Thank
answer
you.
your question, the insurance, I reviewed that approximately February or so, and then most of these are through CIRSA. We do have some excess carriers through other people, but primarily through CIRSA. And I have made a note to have Matt Kashner, who is the risk manager now, bring forth to the council at some point in the near future our insurance coverages and what the deductibles are. That's really all I adjust annually is the deductibles and what our history has been. But we do
Great.
have coverages for just about everything.
Okay, I'll wipe the sweat from my brow. Thank you.
Good conversations. Any other clarifications before we move on? Or questions or comments? All right.
Next
Okay.
slide.
Yep.
Okay, this is where we'll turn it over to John and staff. Get down to the weeds a little bit, give the department heads that are on an opportunity to talk a little bit and talk about the service levels and services that their departments provide to the city. And John, I'll let you take it from here.
And I just want to say thank you, Chris and Duncan, for another excellent facilitation of this meetings. I think we got a lot out of it, and I think council's ready to move on, giving some direction to the city staff. From here on, we're pretty much loosey-goosey. We can do whatever council wants. I did tell the department heads to try and tune in later tonight, because we didn't figure this was going to go as long as the one last week. And I told the councilman or the staff members that I would give them 5 or 10 minutes to explain to the council what their departments do. And, you know, some of these departments, I'll signal out Dean in the Park and Rec. A lot of his money comes from grants and things and is earmarked towards certain projects and things, and I asked him to go through that. So I guess I will start out. As a city manager, I was pleasingly surprised to see that it was in your charter. And the charter was written in the 1950s, and I have to tip my hat to the writers of this charter. I have read the whole thing, and after 60 some years, there's probably only 1 or 2 things in there that really do not belong in there anymore. And that is, it's a really well written charter. And it's a good thing, because to change it, you have to go to the voters. In there, it says the city manager's job is day-to-day operations of the city. All the department heads report to me. The council has essentially three employees. The city manager reports to the council, the city attorney, and the municipal judge. I don't have anything to do with municipal court whatsoever, other than I oversee his support staff. Mike obviously is an independent contractor, and he has his own staff. And that's essentially mine. And since Ben's up here, I'll just go see who else is on here. Ben, you want to tell us what finance does?
Yeah, so finance, and I'll just to help provide maybe some context of what are typical services that you would find in various departments. Doesn't mean what you see on these next few slides where it talks about departments and services is end all be all. They're examples, okay? But so when you look at that next slide here for like finance for myself, you know, financial administration, financial accounting and reporting, the accounting activities for accounts payable, accounts receivable, fixed assets, cash, managing the payroll, managing the budget, utility administration. Utility administration is the invoicing and cash receipting of customer payments for refuse and water. We oversee the tax receipts, whether it's sales, lodgers, or use tax, license administration. That also would include in there, you know, not there, but probably under financial administrations. I'd also include Tabor and compliance management for various financial regulations that we have to adhere to. And then down below there, you see like debt investment management, kind of like your treasury type functions. And then ERP administration. ERP, that's more or less Cassell. Administer it, manage it, make sure the data maintains its integrity and is accurate and complete and such, and who can access what within the system. The actual day-to-day of keeping the systems up and running from a technological perspective, that is in IT. So just a slight differentiation. That's kind of me in a nutshell. There's a lot of items there. Is there any clarification or confusion what we do or do not do? I have a team of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, a team of 4. So one of the things here that we talked about last time, Duncan talked about financial controls. Financial controls and best practices is part of the financial administration component that I see, that we oversee, ensuring segregation of duties, controls on cash and whatnot.
If I could also point out, these are characteristic of typical departments. These are not specific to Cortez. So, for example, the city clerk, wellness program administration, et cetera, may or may not be actually done by them, or the historic board or youth commission under city manager. These are simply representative of the types of things. You'll see the specific lists in your budget as that budget document comes forward.
And that is one of the best practices that we are working towards, is a improved definition of services provided. And then, as Duncan talked about last time, was the performance metrics associated to those services. So how do you know the services be delivered in a quality manner? Those are things that we're working towards. So just as a FYI, and that's one of those longer term, it's an item on our roadmap to complete. John?
Thank you, Ben. Next up is Rick Smith, and then the next after him will be Chief Knuckles. So Rick.
Can I ask a question, John, before we get too deep?
By all means, go ahead.
Okay, the municipal judge, does he ever come and present to us, or how do we get to know him besides going to court and watching?
I guess we could ask him. He's never come while I've been here. But
Okay.
if council wanted to come, I would be more than happy to put a request into him.
Okay, then should I wait till the next meeting to bring that up so we can vote on that, or?
Sure.
Okay, and then my second question is, John, how many people report to you directly?
Count 11.
Okay, thank you.
And that is down because he gave up his the intern and the administrative assistant last year.
Rachel, I might add, might be a good idea to meet the municipal judge. I have not met him yet, and I think that's a good idea. Have him present himself, just so we get to know who he is
And what he does.
and what he does.
Any other questions? I see on my screen, Rick Smith swapped out for Linda Smith, but if Rick's still on here.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Rick.
Good evening, council. Says we are basically a department that serves the other city departments. We have administration, building maintenance. We have the city hall budget. We have the Cortez Community Network, fiber network. We have the shop, the service center building, and we have a unique one here, the equipment fund. And then I've been involved with a lot of the capital expenditures, for example, large projects such as the new city hall, the police building, remodeling the library. We also do a lot of the non-public works contracting, and do quite a bit of the bidding for procurement for the city services. Some of the tasks that we're mandated to do, for example, in the shop, is the Department of Transportation inspection for the trucks. We have to have all our lifts inspected. And a big one that we do is we sell fuel for the city fleet, and we have to be in compliance with our fuel system, underground tanks, and all that with the Division of Oils with the state of Colorado. We also annually do the bucket truck because it has to be dielectric tested every year and certified. Building maintenance, they primarily maintain the buildings with the exception of the rec center. They do take care of like the outdoor restrooms and all the other city buildings. They're responsible for elevator inspections that are state requirement, boiler inspections, and we've been trying to implement the SURSA ADA 5-year plan, but that's been deferred. SURSA, for some of you might not know, is that's our Colorado intergovernment risk insurance. So that's kind of takes care of that. One of the important pieces I'd like to explain to you is the equipment fund. And that's in the city charter where originally it was a 1/4 cent sales tax dedicated for equipment for the general fund. And in the early 90s, that was lowered to 1/8 cent annual appropriation. That there again, just for the general fund. All the enterprise funds, they take care of their own internal, like a trash truck comes out of refuse, for example, that's non-general fund. And just kind of an FYI, last year we drove on city streets about 560,000 miles for all of our equipment. So it takes quite a bit. There's about 150 pieces of equipment that we consider the vehicles, rolling stock. So that's kind of a quick overview. I have 9 employees and we're housed out at the City Service Center. And I'd certainly invite any of you to come by, spend some time, and we could talk to you about that.
Thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick? Seeing none, Chief Knuckles, you're up, and Russ, you're next.
All right, sorry about the delay there. I'm doing this on my phone and I'm having some difficulties with technology. I apologize. The police department is responsible for promoting public safety. Protecting property and people is basically what the police department does. We do that through traffic control, patrolling to detect and deter criminal activity, respond to emergencies, and I think a big part that's overlooked is community education to prevent and solve crime. The police department consists of administration. I fall underneath that. There's a records section, the secretaries. There's an investigation, the detectives, patrol, officers that are out all day and all night, animal control, community service, the kennel, and then we manage the communication center as well, or dispatch. That's pretty much the police department in a nutshell. So any questions?
Chief, all I have to say is after what, 2 weeks? Is that what it is now, 2 weeks?
Yeah, today's day 11. No,
Day 11.
let me see. Yeah, day 11.
I think you got all your divisions in there, bud. That's pretty good.
Thank you.
Chief, I have one question. How many school resource officers do we have? at present?
We have two currently.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. One's in the high school and one's in the junior high primarily.
And how many hours a week do they spend doing that?
That's their primary duty assignment during the school, when school's in session. That
Okay.
so they're there minimum 8 hours a day typically.
Okay. And they have other duties besides just school resource?
They are certified police officers, so yes, but they're primarily assigned as school resource officers. Vern Rucker also does DARE, so he'll travel to the elementary schools and put that program on for them.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
You bet. Sir.
Chief,
Go ahead, Rachel.
just asking about the jail. So do you contract with the sheriff's office to use their jail, or do we have holding cells?
We contract with the sheriff's office, and it's based on individuals and the number of days that they stay.
Vern, can I reach out to you about?
There was a little feedback. I didn't catch that.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Can I reach out to you about the school resource officers and just like at another time, just ask a couple more questions?
Absolutely. Excuse me. I'm always free for any comment, anything you guys want to talk about. I'm open.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Any other question for the chief? Okay, we'll turn it over to Russ, and then Matt is up next.
Okay, am I being heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The enterprise fund for the airport is basically run as a business. We float our own boat. So we bring in revenues to use for expenditures, salaries, benefits, pay the electric bill, and so on. So we don't rely on the general fund. We have a staff of two, myself being one. I do essentially the administrative portion of the work, and I have a operations tech, and he handles the airfield maintenance and building maintenance. So it keeps us pretty busy, just two people there on that facility. We rely heavily on FAA and state grants anytime we need to do a project. And we did get a special grant above and beyond what the city got for the COVID virus relief. So it was $633,000 we got for that. And we're using that for paying our bills for the next year, year and a half, depending on how soon we exhaust those funds. Typically, we could get 2 years out of that, but there's some special projects and things we're trying to get taken care of while we got that fund. And then our regular revenues will be bankrolled to form a nice firm airport fund balance. We typically get airport revenue from the airline for landing fee, building rent. Car rental used to be our second biggest revenue source, but we don't have any car rental, either based at the airport or curbside operations because of the COVID virus. They have not started up yet. They were supposed to start up again in town with Enterprise tomorrow, but that's been put off now to August 3rd. Other revenue sources are land lease, hangar leases, FBO, fuel flowage fees, and their building rent and so on. We deal heavily with regulation oversight from TSA, EPA, State Fuel, and Department of Health, and of course the FAA. Maintenance of the airfield takes a good deal of time this time of the year, and then of course in the wintertime, our main compliance issue there is snow removal beyond the lights, keep everything operating properly. And management of projects, we just finished a $2.2 million project, but that will be unbelievably several months, if not through the end of the year, finishing the paperwork tie-off for that particular project. And as three of you are already aware of, we're going to be having a airport master plan done in the coming year, and the submittals for that are due by next Wednesday, and I will be dispersing them to the three of you when we get those submittals. Take a couple of weeks or so to read through them and get comfortable with who's who, and we'll shortlist for interviews at that point. Any questions?
Russ, I think it would be beneficial just to clarify a little bit more on the grant side, like how much is granted and then where the city matches and where the city matches comes from typically.
Are you talking about a construction project or the COVID project?
Let's talk about construction, because that's like more or less your annual.
Right.
That's a regular recurrence. The COVID is a special instance.
Yeah, normally we pay anywhere from we receive anywhere from 90 to 95% of a grant from the feds to do a project. The remaining 5 to 10%, depending on the year, is shared typically 50-50 with the state. So we pay about 2.5 to 5 cents on the dollar for any large construction projects that are done down there. I also have a $300,000 pavement maintenance project that we're going to do later in the summer, early fall, that the state is the grantee on that, and that will be a 90-10 split. So we'll be putting up 33,000. They'll be putting up 297,000 for that project. That has not been bid yet. We're holding off for some other logistics to fall into place.
And as we talked about, so Russ, if I get this incorrect, please correct me, is the city's match, that the match that Russ has to come up with for the airport for those grants comes out of his fund balance typically.
That's correct. So we try to make a small profit every year, cubbyhole that, so that we have funds set aside for these grant opportunities. Normally, we don't get grants of any larger than 150,000. The last 2 years, they had a special grant program that just went into effect, and that was if you made 8,000 boardings, you got $600,000 grant. So we made that level 2 years running, so that gave us 1.2 million right there to use toward our project this past month. And the other funds were the 150 grant funds that we had saved up over a period of time. And then we borrowed forward for a period of time to come up with the total project grant cost. And the FAA did pony up an additional 700,000, and they forgave a portion of our payback of 150, and they also made that grant 100% with no match as a result of the COVID legislation, COVID relief. So that was a pretty good deal.
So
The airport came out of this really well, out of this COVID virus thing, because we got extra money, we got grant relief, we got other avenues of relief. The only thing that's really hurting us now is the car rental. We're having cancellations of people coming here, even though our boardings are rising very exponentially. They're canceling their trips because they have no way to get around once they get here. So we're trying to work a deal with the airline to bring in a couple of cars just for any kind of level of relief.
Again, Russ, one more comment that I think a takeaway that I learned from you was, I think it's pertinent for you all as council members, as you're looking at, as Chris talked about, short-term, mid-term, long-term, right? What's 2025, what's 2030, what's 2035 look like, is the airport sounds like they have seasons of grants. Okay, but those seasons may have like 3 years of lots of grants, and then like 3 years of little to no grants.
Right.
Is that
We've just come off a 7-year drought of no state or federal grants. So we've waited a long time to get anything done.
Okay, I have a few questions for you, Russ.
Okay.
Okay, so the main building then where passengers are coming in and out,
Terminal building.
the terminal building. So who's in charge of like janitorial services and making sure that place is clean and has soap and hand sanitizer?
That would be the operations tech, the fellow that takes care of building and airfield maintenance. He does that first thing in the morning after the 6:45 a.m. flight leaves. He goes in and does janitorial.
Okay, because there was no soap when I was there the other day.
Okay, I'll bring that up. What was it over the weekend?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the grants, does that cover, say, renovation or capital projects of that building or expansion?
The only time the feds get involved with terminal buildings is when you build an entire new terminal complex, the building, the ramp, parking lot, and things of that nature. And quite often that can be anywhere from a 50-50 proposition, 25-75. It just depends on the airport, the community, what pot that they're in for funding.
Okay, so like for the parking lot to get redone, that would not come out of Public Works.
We have budgeted that for next year to come out of the COVID relief funding.
Okay. Thanks, Russ.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Russ, this is Mayor Levy. I'm speaking about the fires that we've been having recently. How is that impacting the airport?
Positively. It's very busy down there when there's an active fire. Right now, there isn't one. So we have a lot of aircraft waiting on standby. But when they had that mission going for a couple of weeks, 10 days or so, it was extremely busy. They bring their own fuel through the fence, but they have to pay us a flowage fee. They pay operations fees for the slurry tanker drops. And they pay a ramp fee when we had to close a taxiway for one of the very large helicopters. He wasn't a good neighbor due to his rotor blast. He's extremely heavy rotor blast. So we had to close a taxiway to put him on, and we charged him to do that. So we're probably going to make about $5,000 in the month of June just on fire operations. And of course, the fire season is not over yet, so that could build from there.
Thank you, Russ.
Sounds like I'm up. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead. And Linda Smith, you're next. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. First of all, I want to talk about the risk management since that came up a little bit ago. So Sersha is our insurance provider, and they are a municipal self-insured pool that is nonprofit. They insure many, many cities in Colorado. I would say probably the vast majority. So we take the best practice recommendations from them, and that's how we're coming with our limits and stuff. And I can provide that if you guys would like to see those limits. Just take me a little bit of time, but no problem there. Let's see. So risk management, that's a big part of my job. And then I'm the plan administrator for the health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, and life insurance. I'm the plan administrator for our retirement plans, and we currently have 2 457 plans and 2 401A plans. We do have a fiduciary committee for the retirement plan, and that includes the city manager, finance director, the police chief, and myself. I'm also the plan administrator for our work comp insurance, and that's through Pinnacle. Of course, I'm heavily involved in all of the hiring, terminations, discipline, employee training. We do orientation for all new employees. And that goes back to SERSA. They require us to show a certain number of videos. When we get points for that, and it all ties into our renewals and audits. I think that's about it for tonight. Any questions on that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask a question. Sorry. What do you do for leaving employees then, Matt? Is there like an exit interview and that's evaluated by staff, or is that not something council has anything to do with?
Well, that's a personnel thing, so council really can't have anything to do with that. I feel like we do exit interviews, and that's something that I do myself, and then I share that with any supervisors and department head that employee worked with, as well as the city manager. We discuss it. If they've brought forth concerns or safety issues or complaints, then that's something that we try to work through.
Matt, thank you so much for kind of elaborating on the municipal insurance, the nonprofit. I think that John mentioned that you might be able to join us hopefully in a work session sometime. And then if you could bring that breakdown of what's going on, and hopefully other council members would be interested in that.
No problem.
Thank you.
Not hearing any other questions for Matt. Linda, you're up, and Phil, you're on deck.
Hey, City Council. Most of the items that the city clerk's office does, you guys are sort of a piece of that with the city council meetings that I mainly work for, getting the agendas out, getting the meetings ready for the nights, which we haven't done yet, but hopefully soon we will be. But my main piece that I also do is the business licenses. We don't have a lot of those for the city, but we do have the liquor and marijuana, which bring in fees because those are received each year. Each liquor establishment and marijuana establishment do have to renew their licenses every year, and that's what you do during the consent agenda unless we have issues with them. But those are fees that are received. Most of them are set by state statute. We stay at the top of those fees and change them when we can. It's not allowed very often that we can, but we do stay with those fees. We have other business licenses, plumbing. I do not know why these are chosen. They were here when I came many years ago, but plumbers, pawnbrokers, and tree pruners also have to get licensing through the city of Cortez, and they are annually redone. So the plumbers that don't renew their licenses are taken off our list. People call all the time for the community to know what current city plumbers we have licensed. So that is one of the biggest ones that we have. It's only $25 a year for those business licenses, but there are a lot of them, especially plumbers and tree pruners. We have 6 marijuana stores, which we probably have about 35 liquor licenses that we maintain each year. They pay their renewal fees, plus they pay an occupation tax, which is allowed by state statute. And those are about $325 a liquor license. So it can really add up for those 35 licenses. I do the elections every 2 years on even numbered years. So next year I won't have anything in the budget for an election. If something comes up and you guys want to put a question on the ballot, we will have to come up with the funds for that. Elections cost approximately $15,000 to have one. And that's the mail ballot cost. It could be more or less depending on how it's done, but that's the usual cost that I budget for. I also do all the information that's out there for people that want like an ordinance that was passed, or they want information on resolution. All those are kept in our records files. They are kept from the beginning of the city. I have all the minutes since the city began. Those are all kept in our vault, our fire vault that we bought when we moved to our new city hall. We also have lots of files that are important to the city that are kept in there too. We don't have to buy new filing cabinets or anything for those. They're just something that we do. So they're not really a big expense I have in the budget at all. The one thing that is my passion that I love that I've been able to continue doing since I began in '92, I worked for the Parks and Rec then and the clerk at that time, was the wellness program. We started that in 1992 for our employees. It's been something that's grown over the years. It's probably something that I personally feel is real important to our employees. We haven't done anything with it since March. We're trying to just leave that money sit there in case that it's needed for other places more important. But I'm glad to see that we're still able to keep it there. If we get to bring it back in the next year or two, then that's great. But it's something that I have a passion for, and I think it's something that's important to our employees for lots of reasons. But we have lots of fun programs we do. It's a morale thing. It's also to encourage people to, just stay focused and do something for themselves. We offer different classes. We try to help people to quit smoking, weight loss. We have lots of things that we offer, and it's really nice for our city that we're able to do that. So we just try to stay with that. Those are the main things that I do. So I don't know if you have any questions.
Linda, I have a question. The wellness program, what kind of programs do you offer to the employees?
Well, we've tried to have every single month, we tried to have a luncheon where we would do activities together. Sometimes we would play, I would say, like when pickleball became really important and special to our community, we went to the outdoor pickleball courts and we had a day where we had rackets and people could try it, and we cooked hamburgers, and lots of our employees, sometimes it's an introduction to something they've never done. So we would try to offer something different. We've been to our golf course. We've just done lots of different things. We've played volleyball. We've had even the roller derby girls come one year and do a show on what they do. So it's more or less just offering different activities that employees may learn about that may interest them. We try to offer, we have an offering for losing weight. If you're needing help with that, we'll help pay for you to see a doctor. And if you meet your goal, the city has an incentive for that. We've had smoking cessation classes for people, try to help them with that. We've had many people very successful with those programs, to help encourage them to do something different and better. We've had a program where you kept track of your challenges with other employees, try to encourage you to walk more just to meet your points. We had incentives for that. They're not big, but they're enough to bring people together and to put a little bit of that competition. We try to make it not real complicated, but you also have to have the record keeping to keep people accountable. So, that's the main pieces that we do with it.
Thank you, Linda.
Competitive spirit.
Hmm?
I think Linda would agree there's a very competitive spirit amongst the employees.
Yes, and when we first started, we had this competition we had with the hospital. That's changed for them. We've always thought about maybe having a competition with the county or the schools. you know, you just have to spend some time on it, and you can pull those kind of things together, and it sort of encourages people to meet others, and you know, that's sort of my thing.
Linda, I've got a question about records, like old files.
Uh-huh.
Are all of those old records digitized, or?
They are not, and I wish
Okay.
they were.
So
But
that
we've
that
not,
could be an expense that could come up, you know, not yearly, but like a big expense to
it is
digitize.
something, it is something that I would love to have done before I'm, you know, no longer working for the city. It is really important that we do that, but we just never had an additional money to do it. It will be expensive because we're gonna have to buy software, but once it's there, all they're gonna have to do is just keep it going. But our minutes, those things should all be digitized someday. Right now I have everything on a Rolodex. I know people are like, really? But it works. So, but someday, you know, we really need to do that.
Okay, and how are those being preserved right now?
They're all in a fire safe.
Okay.
And just so you're all aware, Linda has, you know, with help from other department heads, has identified a solution that would meet the needs of the city, and had a lot of work has been done on that. We even had it budgeted in last year at one point, but because we had to balance the budget for 2020, it did come out. So, you know, if there's more discussion, I'm sure she can talk more to that, what it entails, and you know, as you know, I can also help on that as well if you're looking into it.
Yeah, we did a lot of work on, I went to Durango, I viewed theirs. They've had theirs for several years. You know, the clerk worked with me on how that could look, how that could be done, and we got prices. It's just, we've not been able to get there. But someday the city will be able to do that, I hope. Any other questions?
Bill, you're up, and then Alyssa would be next.
Good evening, everybody. I know I shotgunned you when we did the council when everyone was running for election. I don't really have enough time to really go in much more depth than that was, other than to I'll give you some more information. I'm Director of Public Works. IT has been absorbed into Public Works, and I'm currently the Acting Director of Planning and Building. There's 45 personnel in the 3 different departments. I have 11 direct reports and 1 contracted report. You know, and depending on the divisions, I mean, obviously there's administration, which takes care of myself and some support staff in the building, as well as engineering, which we're contracting out now, safety and inspections. That's basically the core of our administrative team. And then we have a public works superintendent who takes care of the streets, water distribution, as well as our sweeper operations. He has 4 direct reports, I'm sorry. Water plant, we have 5 operators out there, 4 operators at the plant, 1 full-time cross-connection control personnel that does backflow testing in the field to make sure that cross-connections and contaminations are eliminated. We have refuse and recycling. I have 2 direct reports there. We do collect all of the municipal, residential, and not all of the commercial. Commercial is out for you know, the marketplace, but the residential is locked up by the city. We also collect voluntarily residential recycling, as well as having a drop-off site at the service center in the northwest section of the city that we've actually curtailed some of the commodities we accept due to the C-19 issues, and able to deposit those. IT is really a blended team. You know, one of our personnel is Ron Smith, who works with Rick Smith in networking, the CCN fund, as well as IT. Then I have Bill and Kyle Kuhn, who are IT support technicians, and then a system analyst, Shay Orred, who actually works at PD. So between the 4 of them, they provide all the support for the city, for IT, phones, you know, servers, software, licensing, support tickets from all of our users, internal and external. This year, we did pick up the fire department, and we do provide service to them as we have, you know, the same customer base. With planning and building, we have the 2 planners, building inspectors, code enforcement, as well as receptionist and permit technician. I have 2 direct reports there. Tracy Hughes, who oversees the land use code and the planning aspects of it, and then Sean Canada, who takes care of all the fire and building inspection activities, as well as code enforcement. But what do I do in all this? Well, you know, I feel like my role here with the city of Cortez and any jurisdiction that I worked is, you know, I'm a facilitator. My title's director, but I'm a facilitator. I make things happen for people, through people. And, you know, my team is, you know, how I achieve everything I do for the city. And I step up to the plate for them at every turn because, and I've told them before many times, they need me a lot less than I need them. And so, you know, that's how I feel like my role is here is just trying to balance the needs of the city with limited resources, and then also supporting all the different departments in the city that we can with our resources. I'd like to spend a lot of time with you guys. We have a lot of stuff that sat on the table with the last council moving out, preliminary engineer reports, conservation plans, all kinds of stuff. But I know you're up against with finances, but I could bend your ear for hours. I guess if anybody has any questions, I do sit on the Southwest Transportation Planning Region, which is a CDOT Region 5, 5-county board. I'm a voting member. I'm the chairman, actually. And I also do represent the city on the Southwest Basin Roundtable, which is, you know, river basins in the Southwest Colorado area. We are just a group of voting members from all various water users, recreational, ag, municipal, and the like. And I'm also a member of the statewide transportation advisory committee for CDOT for the city. That's it.
So Phil, how come IT reports to you instead of directly to John?
Well, when in 2015, when that department was handed to me by the previous city manager, you know, my plan was to consider that a success when it fledged on its own again. But you know, Shane said that that's never going to happen, so that's why it was just handed and put under me, and there it sits. That's all I have, boss.
Any other questions? Alyssa, you're up.
Hi, everybody. I'm the new library manager or the library director. This is only my 2nd week, so I've just been spending a lot of time last week just getting to know staff and meeting with John and just kind of trying to get a sense of how it all works together. Basically, the library offers resources to our community, to our patrons. Those resources can be print materials, it can be digital materials. We offer programming for all age groups. We offer computer classes. We offer a community meeting space that folks can use. During times where there is no COVID and things are more regular, you know, we're a community hub where people who don't have access to those resources any other way really rely on us. Lots of folks without internet really rely on the library to be able to come in and get things done now that we're in such an online world. But we also serve as a community partner. We partner with lots of other nonprofits to make sure that we're getting information out to people and people are aware of the resources that are available across the board. So we're also a part of that conversation too. You guys have any questions?
Yeah. Hi, Alicia. I was just wondering if you could give a brief overview of what the library services are right now in the time of COVID.
Yes, so we are in the phase, the Safer at Home order, public libraries across the state of Colorado. It's been a little bit confusing, although the governor has put out executive orders. Libraries have conveniently been left out of that for the most part. So most libraries are deferring to their public health departments. John and I met today. We had a lengthy conversation about how we want reopening to look and how the safest way to go about that. I'm also partnering with Dolores and Mancus, the two library directors there, so that we can sort of be more informed as a county. Right now, we're doing curbside. So basically, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, folks can call. They can pop up to the door and a staff member can assist them. They're not allowed in the building, but a staff member can assist on at least getting some of those print materials into people's hands. You know, we have Overdrive, which is digital, so folks can use that 24/7. The next phase, when we get there, would be very limited and probably by appointment. And that would probably consist of, again, allowing people in the building for limited times to get materials and also for that computer piece of it, because that's a really big part of it. The biggest thing we need to consider is how do we keep not only staff safe, but patrons safe with social distancing. And we need to come up with a really good plan of what exactly that looks like. So there will be a few more phases to come before we fully open back up. And we're really going to have to defer to CDC and CDH for Colorado Public Health on a statewide level to really be well informed as to you know, what that looks like. So we're going to take our time and just make sure we're coming up with a plan that's safe for everybody.
That's great. That sounds diligent. Thank you. Have you noticed, I don't know, is Wi-Fi reachable outside of the library? Have you noticed people convening there? Have you?
Wi-Fi is accessible, and we've also actually, before I came, Lisa, who was the interim, she came up with a great idea. We do have some laptops, so folks are able to check out a laptop and use it right outside of the building. They have to give us an ID and a library card and all that good stuff to make sure that, you know, we're getting our equipment back. But we do have some options. Unfortunately, it hasn't been utilized. But I'm looking at some ways, like through Facebook and even our website, of maybe putting that information out so that more folks know about it.
That's incredible. That's music to my ears. Yeah, great job. Incredible work. And congratulations on your position.
Thank you so much. I've got a lot to learn just about Cortez in general and Montezuma County, but everybody has been amazing and I'm super excited to be here. So thank you.
Alicia, this is Mayor Levy, and welcome to the library system in Cortez.
Thank you.
Is the library providing any online services or digital platforms or Zoom?
That's what we would have normally. So we do have our databases and our Overdrive. What I'm trying to figure out right now, I was able to get a laptop going with Zoom. So potentially, possibly when we open, we could maybe dedicate a study room to having a laptop in there, and potentially folks being able to use that by appointment to be able to utilize that service. We're just going to have to really look at the social distancing piece and how we need to arrange the library, how many computers will be able to be in use. But yeah, we're going to diligently try to serve our patrons the best that we can under the circumstances that we're in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? I did not see Dean or Carla on here. Is Dean or Carla on? That would be it then, folks. I appreciate your participation, and if you have any questions, we'd be more than happy to take them.
And if not, then we'll do some next slide and do some key takeaway points. Just kind of wrap things up. Next. Okay, from the first session and going into the second session a little bit, just a reminder, the budget is arguably the most critical document in effective management for city functions. These are unprecedented times. You've heard several times, COVID-19, how it's affecting us now and what it's going to do to us and what staff's trying to do around it. Remember that the budget itself is a living document and can be modified by council, just like Duncan was saying, by budget amendments at any time. So it's not something that's set and you can't touch it until it's gone all the way through. Remember, it is a flexible living document. Tracking the fund balance is a continuous process as it changes almost minute by minute in some cases, but at least daily. That total appropriated revenues must equal or exceed total appropriated expenditures. And that's kind of set by charter. You need to remember you really aren't supposed to spend more than what you have. And you can balance that budget in several different ways, which Duncan went over. Finally, the city council is responsible for oversight of the budget. And next. Never before has an adaptive management approach to financial strategy been so important. There's so much change going on, so much in fluctuation, not just on a local level, but what can happen across the country. Investments can be affected, as Matt was talking about, the investments that we have with 427 plans and for retirement. If the economy is hit, there's a big downturn, that's going to affect what those returns are going to be. So it's broad scale. Next. And absolutely, there's a need for this council to hold in advance, to set its goals, objectives, and direction for the city, so that you're not operating off of the past city council's goals and objectives, that you take time to see where they were going and whether or not the city still needs to go that way, maybe need to diverge a little bit, or whether you're needing to splurge more into a specific or come up with something new that you see that's going on. And with COVID, that may very well be the case. So I strongly encourage you to look down the road, get yourself an opportunity to set in advance where you can all meet and talk about where you're wanting to go, but also learn about where was the last council headed. And you may want to visit with John, whether you want to bring a separate facilitator in to help you get there. So more questions, comments?
Dean called me and he said he's on his phone. He's ready to talk, but Dean, if you're on here. Unmute yourself, Dean.
John, I don't see Dean on there. I think he's on as an attendee.
He just came on.
So Bill, do you need to unmute?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
Right,
Good. I've been on this for 2 hours, so I was hoping to get to. Yes, yeah, good to finally get through. Yeah, I'm the Parks and Recreation Director, and we have 15 full-time employees for the Parks and Recreation. I have 5 direct reports under me. And in a typical year, we usually have from around 90 to 100 part-time and seasonal employees, or called temporary employees now for seasonals. And under Parks and Rec, we have over 600 acres of land between the parks, natural areas, and the golf course that my department is responsible for. And with the crown jewel, the Cortez Recreation Center, we usually have over 120,000 daily visits each year throughout a year's time. And it's open 90 plus hours per week. So a lot of hours of operation that were available to the community. And I know the librarian's new. She'll be saying shortly that they get more visits than us at the rec center. That's usually the typical.
I think
scoring
ours was
between
about
the library and us.
160,000 last year. So
Yeah,
just
see,
a
there
few
you
more.
go.
Just a
Yeah,
few.
she's already
Just a few.
she's already tooting her horn over there.
Here we go.
Yeah, it's game on right now. Anyway, and then with the outdoor swimming pool, it's one of only two 50-meter pools on the western slope. The only other one 50-meter pool is in Grand Junction at Mesa State College. And John had mentioned earlier about with Great Outdoors Colorado funding, since it's an outdoor facility back in, I believe, 2010, we received the money, but 2011, we actually did about $1 million renovation project to the outdoor swimming pool. And the grant, I believe, a special opportunities grant that Chris Burkett helped write, it was for around $760,000 for that $1 million project. So it was a pretty significant sum of monies to help improve that facility. And with that said, with Great Outdoors Colorado funding, once you utilize that towards a facility, you're obligated as a community to have that facility continue for 25 years. So that's typically what the council has signed on that they'll keep that facility or amenity going for 25 years. And we also have received monies, like, for example, at Centennial Park, that was a GOCO funded project, as well as the pickleball courts next to the library. We also have the Conquistador Golf Course, and we contract out with Radowski Golf LLC to provide the services at the pro shop, and we could go into greater detail on what he does versus the other city employees. And then we also have a golf course superintendent that's responsible for the maintaining of the course. And then we have our just incredible park system, and we have a park superintendent that overall takes care of all of our parks and the medians, along the medians. And John Doherty took a tour of our parks facilities, and I'm sure you were quite surprised, John, of all the different things that division is responsible for. It's quite a breadth of responsibilities that they have. And we also have the Carpenter and Gear Natural areas, and that's on the north edge of town, and it's around 176 acres of outdoor acres that gets utilized quite a bit, and especially during these times, it's gotten a lot of use. And then we have the recreation programs, and we have a recreation supervisor that provides outdoor programming. And one of the activities like they're currently doing is the Playground Days program at the South Softball Complex, and that's a summer camp program throughout the summer. So I guess with that, I would, any questions?
Dean, I wanted to ask a couple. This is Arlena. Sorry, I haven't asked them when we were at the meetings, the advisory meetings. So how long has, sorry, getting distracted. How long have you had the grant for the outdoor pool now? Or like how long, how many years has it been since we received that grant and swore to stay open for 25 years?
Well, it would have been, I think, intact if my memory serves me correctly, and Chris Burkett could help, but I believe it was 2011 that we completed the project, and so it would be, it'd be 9 years currently.
And has the outdoor pool ever brought in a profit?
Not since I've been here, maybe back before, but it's around a 33% cost recovery. So usually generates around 60,000 in revenue, and then it costs about anywhere from 180 to 200,000, depending on how many repairs and anything major and we've had some major repairs in the last several years, being the age of that facility to take care of.
I think the highest return we'd ever seen was before the recreation center was being used, and it was about a 54% return. I think that's the highest we'd ever seen.
And that's just because we've tried to keep the cost of entry pretty affordable.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
That's correct.
And it's only
Yeah.
a 3-month season, so it's really hard to recoup a return when you're only open 3 months, and if you get really cool days on the either end, it makes it difficult. So yeah.
Yeah, and June is typically the highest revenue, and then July, is about half of June, and then August is about half of July. Just because halfway through August, usually school's about ready to start and having enough guards, so it pretty much just runs the middle of August on the weekends till Labor Day weekend.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
Well, with that,
Yeah, Dean, this is Mike. I just want to commend you on your BMX track there. That's quite a facility we have, and we're very proud of it in Cortez.
Well, and Mike, I want to give all the credit, a lot of the credit to the Cortez BMX group. They are an exceptional partner. We are a support mechanism for them. They have gone out and done a lot of their own fundraising and secured the folks to make improvements to that track. And Mark Baxter and his group, the Cortez BMX, can't say enough good things about the partnership we have with them.
Thank you.
Hey, Dean, I see that the sign for Veterans Park has been uncovered. When is the tentative unveiling in the celebration you're going to have for that? Do you have any report on that yet?
Yeah, yes. I mean, right now, as it stands at this time, by the time the governor gave his okay for a large enough gathering, it was too late to have something over the 4th of July. So I had proposed to the veterans groups for a Patriots Day, which would be on September 11th. And so they are right now looking into that as being the date. I haven't heard from all of them yet if that's an official date for it, but it's looking promising at this point in time. So, and that's on a Friday. It'd be Friday, September 11th.
Fingers crossed.
Yep.
Guess we'll hand it back to Chris.
okay. Any other questions on any other aspects of first session or this session? I guess I would just suggest to at some point, if council has any other thoughts or needs, certainly let Duncan or I know, or John, and we could come up with another training as you might wish to have.
We do have another informational training for you. I believe the director of CML is going to come down and talk to you sometime in the near future. We had all this planned before COVID, and then everything got blown apart. So we had a long training session, and we're spreading it out far more than we wanted to, but we're going to get it all in, hopefully.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.